Hey there, welcome to Storytime Live. I'm Dr. Jennifer Bird. I'm a biblical scholar, and I care very much about what people do with what they find in the Bible. So that's why I'm doing Storytime. Started out as a way to engage specific themes around my latest book, the book is Marriage in the Bible. What do the texts say? And the themes were marriage, sexual relationships, and physical harm involving body parts. But I've expanded it to just general story time, reading stories from the Bible, talking about passages from the Bible or ideas in the biblical texts, and engaging them in our current contexts with our current lenses, if you will. I'm also bringing on scholars from the field of biblical studies. At least so far, that's where they've primarily come from. And I am thrilled, I'm delighted to have with me today Shelly Matthews. Before I introduce her, I just want to give a quick shout out. I'm so grateful to all of you who are able to be here and want to be here. Also really thankful that I have moderators now. And I'm grateful to those of you who are willing to help me with that. I appreciate you very much. I know that Pragmatic Crystal and LDEM are in the house today, at least, and helping me with that. So thank you for that. I appreciate all the ways that you all support me, by the way. Liking and sharing videos, subscribing to the channel, getting notifications. Some of you have purchased my books. Some of you are patrons of mine. And I appreciate all of the various ways that you do that and say that you appreciate what I'm up to and the work that I'm creating here in this online space. So thank you for your support. So today's guest, the Reverend Shelly Matthews, by the way. So she is currently professor of New Testament at Brite Divinity School, which is under the auspices of the Texas Christian University, which is in Fort Worth. Shelly has both a doctorate in theology and a Master of Divinity from Harvard Divinity School. I forgot to write down what her undergraduate was in. My apologies for that, Shelly. But what's really, I really appreciate the combination of things that Shelly brings to her work. She is both the most gentle scholar that I know, but she also has a fierce mind and a really strong compassion and passion about justice, social justice. So she's a really interesting person, in my opinion, to interact with. So kind and gentle, and yet just a fierce and very able mind. So I hope you'll enjoy our conversation today. Let me tell you a little bit about some of her work. You can see it in the description as well, and you can go find her on her faculty website over at Brite Divinity School. But the work she's initially addressed and was specifically focused around violence in the Newer Testament and early Christianity. I needed to double check with her. I'll ask when she gets on stage here, but I think her published dissertation was The First Converts, Rich Pagan Women, and the Rhetoric of Mission in Early Judaism and Christianity. And from that, she went on and did some work with other people as well around just violence in the New Testament. She also has a book, the one I featured in the thumbnail, which is The Perfect Martyr, which is about Stephen and his story in the book of Acts and how his martyrdom, as well as the rhetoric around differentiating between the Jews and these followers of Jesus, or however you want to qualify these different groups of people, the rhetorical devices, the way that the texts themselves are setting things up. Just very powerful. It's very, and The Perfect Martyr is actually a very accessible book. So anyway, you can go to Amazon.com and see all of her books if you want. But I'm a fan of that, as well as the volume that came out of the program unit that she was a part of in our professional society that was on violence in the New Testament and early Christianity. So a volume came out of that, Violence in the New Testament. She is very proud of a 2-volume feminist commentary on Luke's Gospel that she just co-authored, just came out, I think, a year and a half ago. And I think perhaps most importantly, and this is something I would like to talk with her about, partly because I'm curious what her specific angle on this is, but she's been interested in kind of the way my interest in talking about Paul has kind of spanned my whole career. I think for her, the interest for her that has spanned her whole career as a biblical scholar is a feminist approach to the resurrection. So I really actually want to hear what she has to say about that. She's also a series editor for the Society of Biblical Literature Press, which is the professional society for the field of biblical studies, early Christianity and its literature. She is the co-founder and inaugural co-heir with another colleague I would love to have on this show, Tatsong Benny Liu, in the program unit on racism, pedagogy, and biblical studies. So they did produce a book, at least one, Race and Biblical Studies, Anti-Racism Pedagogy for the Classroom. So trying to help other scholars think through how to be anti-racist in the way they engage in the classroom, which is so important. So anyway, those are some of the bits and pieces of who Shelly is. Delighted to have her with us here. So let me go ahead and bring her out. Did I get some of that? Was I wrong on any of that?
Actually, and I was thinking if you got that from Brite, I probably need to update. You know how it is. Websites need to be updated. I am no longer series editor for SBL Press. I handed that series off to the able hands of Emerson Powery, but I was an editor for a string. So, so that's right in the past. And same with the racism, pedagogy, and biblical studies. For personal reasons, I had to throw a lot of stuff off that I had been doing, and that is now in other people's able hands too. But I'm still proud that I helped to found that program unit, which is still going. And then lastly, my master's degree is actually from Boston University School of Theology. Only the doctorate is from Harvard. Well, especially that, I know one does not want to claim more of Harvard than one can claim. So
I'll go edit it out so it's not out of there.
Boston University. I'm United Methodist historically, and so Boston University is the method. That was where.
Gotcha. I got these from various places. This is weird. Yeah.
No, but the stuff about the books, it's amazing. You read that carefully and well, and I do appreciate. Wow, somebody that I have a trajectory and that you followed it. So that's great.
I'm trying to, at least. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, you've got your fingers in a lot of people. I mean, you're very widely read and gracious yourself, Jen. So thank you for this chance to be on.
Oh, that's nice of you. Thanks, Shelly. Okay, thank you. Yes, I do. I talk about you a lot, actually, and in particular your work on anti-Judaism and the Book of Acts. I did a series working with your books on that, and so there's just lots of reasons to be grateful to you and your voice. In light of all the other parts of life that are happening, right? not in spite of, but in light of all the things we're all juggling. So. Okay. So when I ask scholars here, one of the things I want to do, we do end up talking about your scholarship here, but I like to do it kind of in a backdoor way. So whatever you're comfortable with, and that, everybody's different. Some people have shared some of their childhood stories, and some people just kind of feel more comfortable diving in graduate, undergrad or graduate school or whatever. But I'm interested in getting a sense of who you are and what are the pieces that have informed who you are, and therefore how you became a biblical scholar? Because I know that you were ordained first, right? And then yeah. So any of it, I don't want to tell you what you need to say, but
sure. No, storytelling. I'm fine to go back to not to the very, very beginning, but I do think. I think it's worth sharing. This fact about how I came into biblical scholarship, which I think is a path that others have taken, but I also think it's one that's closing, just given the economics, the neoliberal malaise. But I am a first generation college student. I didn't even know that was a word that was a phrase for a long time, but once I learned it, it does help me to understand some things about, ways that I hear other things or ways I feel about my imposter status. But so I did want to say that, yes, I grew up in the middle of North Dakota, 25 miles from a town of 3,000, 9 miles on a gravel road to the nearest Catholic church. We were Protestants, the only Protestants in this Catholic county of Germans who emigrated from Russia. And we would get 1 hour of free time when everyone else in the public school went to catechism on Mondays or whatever day it was. So,
wow.
Yeah, I mean, and I have to say, I have always, admired and envied Catholics because they have so much, they've got 2 kinds of sin and the confirmation dresses and all the extra things that they had, including that they drank on holidays, which was, as a Methodist, so
scandalous. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, but I want to say that. So I was my mother had 2 years of college, right?
Okay.
So I guess she had associate arts and became a teacher, which is what that was one of the choices that she could have.
Right.
But otherwise, we were farm folk. We drove 25 miles down the road on Sundays to go to the Methodist church. And I have to say, like, the Methodist church was, for me, in that very, very remote place. I've said this in writing in my Luke commentary where we had to introduce ourselves. It was sort of because Methodists, like Catholics, not like congregational churches, has that sort of global connectional feel. Like, you can be from North Dakota, but guess what? You're connected to people in Kenya. I mean, that is the sort of connectionalness. And also we had for a while a Methodist woman preacher when I was little. And so like that gave me an idea that, I could do that, because there were not a lot of role models for women in this very small farm community beyond teaching elementary school and, being a farm wife, which is no small job, right? I mean, it's also known as farming.
Right.
But anyway, I bring that up because it was through the church that I realized, for instance, it seemed to me that, or it seemed to people that I, was academically inclined. And of course I was going to go to college, as my generation did, which of course meant the University of North Dakota, because if you're from North Dakota, I mean, I didn't know what private schools were. Like, there was the University of North Dakota and the satellites, smaller state schools, but there was no other option. But I wouldn't have, even though I was academically, oriented, I didn't know anything. I mean, graduate school, like, even
preparing for that. Yeah.
Medicine, even I thought about medicine, but it was too many years. How could I do that? No one could guide me. And then of course
you ended up doing PhD, as many anyway.
I did as many years with a tenth the pay.
Right.
But I had fair confidence that the Methodist Church would pay for my seminary so that I could get, the education, but nobody, like if someone had said, get a PhD in journalism, it's like, how do you get a PhD in journalism or political science or anything else? So I want to say that I don't think I'm alone as a biblical scholar. And it would be curious to see the demographics of backgrounds of biblical scholars compared to, say, PhDs in political science or PhDs in chemistry.
Okay.
Because I bet there are more, because the church, for whatever else it is, and the church is a lot of things.
It is.
One of the things it can be for people, who grew up in remote places is it is sort of a, it's an institution that you can hang on to and will pay for your graduate school.
That's right. Yep.
So,
and like you said, gives you a vision of something you can do. And that's early, right? It's an early image that's kind of given to you.
Right. Of course, not necessarily the churches where.
Okay. All right. It's complicated.
I'm sure the churches that you talk much about on these, at least in some of your writings, the more restrictive churches, gender wise. But anyway, for some of us, it is path. And even for Catholic women, I have to say, I mean, who cannot obviously be ordained, right, in the feminist movement of the 70s and 80s, why the leading feminist biblical scholars are Catholic is because they couldn't get ordained, right? So all the Protestants who could got ordained, and all the Catholic women academically inclined had to go off to graduate school. So anyway, so I tell that little part of my story because it occurred to me that might be the sort of story you're looking for, but I can tell other stories. If you want to leap,
I actually love knowing that. Well, I actually appreciate knowing that about you. I've watched, and I watch when you post things. I don't follow everybody, but I'm fond of you, and I've seen some of the things you post when you go back to North Dakota or you go wherever your family, and I just think there's some really interesting stories or connections there for you. So I appreciate knowing that. That was a snippet about you that I wasn't aware of. The very remote piece, right? That really has.
I'm sorry. The remote piece. You had asked for like books. There is a book. Oh, go ahead. Just wanted to plug Jill Kerr Conway, The Road to Corain. She was the first woman president of Smith College, but she was born in the outback of Australia, where she spent. I just was rereading just to get ready for this. Yeah. She said she didn't see another girl until she was 8 years old. It was so remote.
That's crazy.
And I have to say, I did see girls before I was 8. But I mean, there's something, I mean, those of us who grew up in remote places have, a particular way of the world, and also imposter complexes when we get into communities where people have had more, I don't know, would you say urban experiences,
more engagement, right? Different cultural engagements, and just larger populations in general, and how that plays out, right?
Yeah. Anyway, okay. So where do we want to go from there?
Well, if you're thinking about who you are, but also like how you became a biblical scholar, what parts of your story help inform why? I mean, you've told us a big piece of that, right? In terms of your upbringing and why the church and why seminary and ordained, but then there's the particular interest that you have had in the anti-Judaic rhetoric, as well as just feminist lenses in general, in terms of Paul's letters or whatever you teach. So I think if there are things that help inform that, that'd be great.
Okay. The feminist piece, I mean, people are different. I know people have different experiences, but I am one who understands the experience of being absolutely committed to something as just or unjust in ways that not everyone has that feeling so early on. I remember getting confirmed in the Methodist Church, and the Methodist minister went to Ephesians and said, well, wives need to submit to their husbands. And that was just so unfair to me as a 13-year-old or a 12-year-old, where it just rang.
Awesome.
So
even at 12.
Untrue. That is not fair. And he was like, a nice liberal Methodist. She's like, well, of course you need to do everything as mutually as you can. But, on the very last minute, if there's absolutely no agreement, someone has to make a decision. But I was so stirred up by that he took me away during the lunch, the confirmation dinner or whatever, and like he had to have this private conversation with me to
calm you down.
So anyway, the feminist piece that that is so unfair was always there, and the anti-Judaism concern, I will say, I mean, I don't know which piece of it. I was steered to the writings of Elie Wiesel as an early college student. And those, touched me, very, that was, the Holocaust was so astonishingly heart-wrenching. And so I was steered to that by reading Elie Wiesel. And then, I mean, serendipitously, I wanted to go to Boston University. I always wanted to go to the East Coast, where the glamorous people live. I guess the West Coast, the coast. But he was teaching at Boston University at the time. So I went to Boston University School of Theology because I was Methodist, and I wanted to go to Methodist seminary because I knew they'd pay my tuition, but also then happened to take courses with Elie Wiesel and hooked up with others who were interested in the question of Jewish-Christian relations.
Oh my gosh. That is so amazing that you had that opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm a little jealous.
Anyway, so that was the entree into the Jewish Christian piece, the feminist piece. But those, I don't know, I've always been gravitated toward ethical readings of biblical scholarship, to the view that we are not just neutral interpreters of the data, but that we need to have a sense of the ethics of our interpretation, and who is harmed by what we do, who it could benefit. So that put me into that. I've been slower to come to the question of race than anti-Judaism, and I'm a lot of factors there, probably my own racism, right? I mean, but and also because racism in the Bible expresses itself, or the problem is somewhat different. It's overlapping, but not the same as the problem of anti-Judaism. And anti-Judaism is, I would say, interlaced in the Christian scriptures in ways that, I mean, of course, the study of biblical studies is, has a racist overlay and racist effects, but it's not, it doesn't, there are not the explicit texts demonizing other races in the way that there are explicit texts demonizing Jews. So those are where I gravitated, but of course, those are all interrelated now. So go ahead.
Well, I was just going to do a brief segue. One of your our colleagues, but I think of her more as one of your friends or colleagues, Denise Buell, right, has written on kind of the construction of race, and that's
right,
and how that came about in the language, in particular in the Book of Acts. I mean, that's where we start to see why this separate race concept, or no?
Yeah, well, actually, I mean, she mentions the Book of Acts in passing and does actually make that connection. I mean, I do think it's not until the 2nd century explicitly that the question is raised, why this third race? And so this formal outlaying of Christianity as a race distinct from Judaism, but you see intimations of that in the Book of Acts, and she notices that, I think, and her lenses for understanding how race and racism work have helped me to understand the Book of Acts. So yes, those are overlapping concerns and issues.
For sure. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you, but so back to you, and so your interest in the Jewish Christian conversation and addressing anti-Judaic rhetoric in the Newer Testament. I should clarify for people, I kind of do this and forget sometimes that I prefer to say anti-Judaic or anti-Jewish instead of anti-Semitic, because Semitic implies languages and different things than anti-Judaic, which is what we're specifically talking about. So as complex.
Yes, I use anti-Jewish when I'm talking about the New Testament, and because I'm speaking of the religion and culture, but not the race or ethnicity. I can explain what I would say anti-Semitism in terms of Hitler and the Nazis and what we have now in white nationalism is that it is an animus directed against the Jews because of their race or ethnicity, whereas in the New Testament, and certainly in the Book of Acts, it's the religion or the refusal to believe in Jesus, which is the problem with the Jews. But Jews are leaders of the movement, and Paul is himself a Jew, and Judaism is embraced. So that makes it different than the anti-Semitism of the modern period, in that if you become a part of the Jesus movement in Acts and you are Jewish, that's celebrated. Whereas for Hitler, if you're Jewish, you can't, it's a racial thing that you can't give up. Even if you converted, you'd still go to the gas chamber, right? Just to the Jerusalem things. Anyway, I was just going to say, so anti-Judaism is a language that I use when I'm talking about the text, and because I do think whatever else we say about the New Testament is that it is happy when Jews declare that Jesus is the Messiah. And that has its own problems, but it's not racial. It's more in the realm of religion.
Yeah, in the realm of religion and a set of beliefs
and practices. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. A set of clarifications there. So you mentioned. So when I was asking, kind of giving you not enough time to think through these ideas. Who are some of the people that have influenced you, or some of the writings that have influenced you, the scholarship? You did mention Jill Kirk Conway just a minute ago. I was trying to pull up the image of her book and I couldn't pull it up very quickly, but
it's fine.
It's well, she is an impressive person, as you said, as the first female president of Smith. But would you say a little? I think you mentioned it, but I was a little distracted because I was trying to find the image. What it is about her work that kind of gave you something, like kind of inspired something in yourself?
Yeah, I mean, just that you can be from nowhere and go somewhere. I mean, that maybe not be very profound.
Yeah. Well, it is though.
Well, it depends on at what age you're reading. But I can move to biblical scholarship if you want to talk about influences within the profession or something else. But that I just mark that as total identification from someone who does who came from a place that is not that is very remote.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I do ask for these influences from people is to expand the potential, like the reading suggestions, and so bringing other authors, bringing other writers into the conversation is a part of my motivation here. So it doesn't have to be biblical scholars that you're referring to. I actually kind of enjoy it when people have brought in other theorists or just other kinds of writing. And Katie Valentine spoke about YA novels, so like so it's fine. I think
you like a broad range of influences.
And also just talking about the fact that we as people are, there are lots of factors that do have an impact on us, and I happen to be talking to scholars, and so I think it tends to be writing, literature of some sort that has shaped us or informed or somehow lit a fire for us. So I think it's nice to broaden, in particular in this kind of public space that I have, other reading beyond what is typically talked about in this space. So in the public biblical scholarship space. So
good. No, thank you.
Yeah. So I know that Elizabeth Schussler-Fierens's work is important for you. I know that you have a very long and intricate relationship.
Yes,
I love her dearly, and it's
awesome. Elizabeth Schussler-Fierens, I don't know how much your audience knows.
I'm not sure. I mentioned her,
interest. But right, In Memory of Her book in 1983 was her sort of big splash book. But 1983, that's when I was in college. I actually was, introduced to her. It was an article she wrote on the Corinthians. So this is before even Antoinette Weyer and others who were thinking about the Corinthian women prophets. But I was just reading this article, and she, this is what Paul says. Well, but just think of what the women would have responded, or why they wouldn't have liked that. And it's like, it hadn't even occurred to me that you could be conscious of someone else in the text and women. So,
right. Instead of just finding a way to agree with what he's saying.
Yeah, no. So to have been a college student when, those big splash feminist books were coming out or were new, that was something, right?
Absolutely.
And so then, and also she was at Episcopal Divinity School at the time. I was at Boston University. So, and of course, I was able to take a class with her then. But I guess what I would say about Elizabeth, and I don't know. I think that her work is very sophisticated and repays rereading. And what makes me a bit sad is she is known primarily as the author of In Memory of Her in 1983.
I know.
And people, if they want to acknowledge feminist biblical scholarship, Elizabeth Fierens 1983. But that was her first big splash book. I mean, she wrote one at the same time called Bread Not Stone, and she had her German dissertation was published. But she did go on to refine and grow and expand in sophistication in later work. So, I mean, I think the Jesus and the Politics, what she said, the Rhetoric and Ethic. There's a handful of books. So it
really important books.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'm happy to say that there is going to be the Journal for the Historical Study of Jesus, I think it's called, is going to do a retrospective on her book titled Jesus and the Politics. It's a 25 years after its publication, and I've been asked to contribute. And I'm happy to see, places where it's being picked up. But
right.
Yes, these ideas, I mean, as some people now think it's quaint and that they're not important or we've gone past it, but basically things, I can hear in my head now people who have dismissed some of this, but the hermeneutics of suspicion or reading against the grain, the tip of the iceberg, that she had, proscription does not equal description. Historical reconstruction matters. For the purpose of liberation, we need a past. There are things. That Jesus, was not a man, or raising the question of Jesus's gender identity and criticizing the idea of pitting Jesus against women. That is, Jesus and women. Is even saying it that way pits Jesus on one side and women on the other. So I don't. Anyway.
Yeah, she's. I do. I love the way she has addressed lots of issues, and she modeled for me, at least in Bread Not Stone. Taking very seriously the implications of what we're saying. And to me, that's what you're doing when you look at rhetorics, right? You look at how do these things play out? What do they lead to? And I think a lot of her work is very difficult to read. It is dense, right? And I think she's trying to do that, trying to get some very serious work in the books for people. But
the question of difficulty level, I know that some of her writing is dense. I mean, and it depends on where you are as a reader or what you need at the time.
Absolutely.
But anyway, she's a grand influence on me in terms of thinking about justice, thinking about the ethics of interpretation, thinking of feminism intersectionally. Of course, she did not coin the word intersectional, but her word kyriarchy, I think, as a way of thinking of, theorizing oppression as intertwining or as intersectional, is important, and is something that is influencing me as I go forward in my book, my forever book, which is almost done. On the feminist politics of resurrection.
Yes.
But go ahead.
So I want to back up for just a second and talk a little bit. And in fact, actually, Joe Marshall goes by Jay now. Jay mentioned the term kyriarchy.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Okay. That was new for me.
Okay.
Anyway,
go ahead.
No, I love their work, but I wanted to talk about kyriarchy because you referenced it. Can we talk a little bit what that term means? Just because you did throw it out there, and it's helpful to understand what you're getting at.
If it's a new word, that is especially helpful. Yes. So many feminists, certainly white feminists, have used the word patriarchy, which derives from two Greek words meaning rule of the fathers, right? Arche is to rule, patriarchy is the rule of the fathers. But Elizabeth, theorizing domination and oppression, says it's not that all men rule all women, right? So, that is, we have, it's not oppression is not a binary, but so she offered up thinking of her ancient source material, kyriarchy, which comes from the Greek word kyrios, meaning lord or master. So not rule of the fathers, but rule of the master, which better relates to many societies' experience of oppression, in that not all men have all power over all women, but it's the lord or the master, the highest echelon of men, who have the highest point in, the pyramid of oppression. And of course, there are elite women whose place in the pyramid of oppression can be higher than that of lower class or lower status men. And of course, not just men and women, but of course we can put sexuality, the spectrum sexual identities into the pyramid as well, but it complexifies the ways that oppression and domination work. I will say it definitely works for the Greco-Roman world because the Greco-Roman world, by and large, modeled on a Greco-Roman household which consisted of the head of the household and then the slaves and the women and other members underneath. I do have a colleague in Hebrew Bible who alerted me to, I want to say it was Carol Myers. It was someone who argued that in ancient Israelite culture or village culture that kyriarchy doesn't work.
Interesting.
That is, village structures itself, we don't have the head of the house, father at the head of the household. So I want to be careful to say that it's not a term that, I'm sure there are cultures and ways,
instances of
different, social and cultural alignments where kyriarchy does not work so well. But I think it works definitely for the Greek world, Greco-Roman world in which I study, and it works pretty well as a heuristic for the modern, world, Western world.
It does.
The rule of the masters, right? The rule of the elite, and how, white women are often in that, in layers, with problematic positions, not just victimizing positions, but So does that help? Kyriarchy, I'm pleased to see this is a term, it was coined by Elizabeth, but it really has taken off in other disciplines. I see it used in LGBTQ scholarship a lot. Kyriarchy works as a way to speak about oppression that's not simply, some of the all men dominate all women. Doesn't work.
Right. It's not complex enough to understand what's going on, and there's ways. Thank you for that. That was a lovely explanation. I appreciate that.
Okay.
So we've done all this talking about you and where you've come from. I do want to spend some time talking about, in particular, the work you're most excited about. But I hope that people who are listening, I just want to say this, appreciate on some level, or can hear that it's hard to describe, right, the field of biblical study. So I think part of it is it's hard to describe why your voice, you mentioned, right, that some people think that Elizabeth's work or feminist biblical scholarship is irrelevant now or something, or they dismiss the need for what you refer to, the hermeneutics of suspicion. I remember I was seen as problematic for even engaging a hermeneutics of suspicion at my first PhD program, and people just, in particular males, but not just white males, but a lot of males, find this kind of angle unnecessary. What's that? Yes,
and women scholars too.
There are a lot of women scholars too. Yep, who don't
want to get in on the establishment.
That's right. Right, and so either they don't appreciate or they don't want to understand or whatever it is. Right, there are lots of reasons, but so I think part of me wants to be trying to talk about why this is even important. And Shelly, I think you and I have had some conversations or exchanges over the years where I was in a very different place, and I felt a serious urgency to want to get your work out in the world. And I remember the time in your world, your response was basically like, well, I've done what I've done, and people are going to appreciate it or they're not. I really can't do much about that right now. And I remember just being so frustrated because I
have no memory of that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. It didn't traumatize you. I
have no memory of that.
I felt badly afterwards.
Okay.
My point here is, like every other field, right? People who are coming in with more critical angles and challenging these, in this case, these longstanding canons, and challenging the authority of them, challenging reading with them. That's what we mean by reading with the grain, reading them and agreeing with them, finding a way to accommodate them. Scholars who are challenging doing that, accommodating and all that isn't a huge portion of the field.
No,
it is a growing portion, but it is not the consensus. It is not the predominant, right? I mean, that's a fair statement.
And I would understand, and I understand that some, and Elizabeth and in the feminists of those that era were careful, right? They were all raised in the church, right? As was I, and wanted to stress that double-edged nature of scripture, as scripture is both salvific and oppressive. That is, you can find both things. And I think as we come to see all the oppressive things, that we tend to highlight that more, and that is off-putting to people who love the scriptures. And I don't know, in my, the senior status I know of, in my older years, whatever you want to say, I have been trying to recognize and, sort of hit in with constructive things that can be said about scriptures. I did just hear, we had she was from India, I forgot her name. A South Asian preacher who came to Brite, and she did say in a sermon, she was talking about reception of scriptures in India, where not everyone is Christian, and how someone did, read the Bible from front to back and said, oh, wow, this is really a book that gives dignity and power to the oppressed. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess, so
wow, those are impressive lenses.
Right. And I want to acknowledge the Sermon on the Mount and, the sermon in Nazareth, the places where, Galatians 3:28, if I can just shorthand, in Christ there's no junior, the places that have signaled freedom and hope and aspirations. So I want to affirm that there are constructive things we can do with scriptures. But yes, I have my past has also involved trying to confront directly the anti-Judaism of the text, trying to confront directly the violence within the text, and not to destroy or, not in a purely deconstructive way, but just because as a Christian, and I still identify as a Christian, maybe on the margins of the tradition. I mean, in a complicated way, I still identify as a Christian, but I think as Christians, it's much better to just face head on, yep, that's violence, instead of saying it's not there. That also, it makes us better ecumenical dialogue partners if we don't always think that our scriptures are so enlightened and don't, violence free. So I think that has always been in my bag of hermeneutical lenses, is to try to address squarely the problems, but not for the sole purpose of, I don't want to destroy people's faith. I want to, I remember reading a book, 20 years ago, I think it was called Mature Christianity, I want to say. And it was some, I don't know who the scholar was, but his argument is like, look, there's anti-Judaism in the text. Let's deal with it. That would be the mature thing to do.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
So anyway, that's where I come from.
Yeah.
And that led to the violence, the New Testament book, and in part to Perfect Martyr, which, sort of finds this violence against Judaism paradoxically interwoven into these scriptures that perform mercy, right?
And also focus in on a particular sect or segment of Judaism while they're trying to dismiss another segment of the same.
Right. Yeah. So that's been my work. And I would say my next book, which I've been working on a long time.
Very eager to hear about, please.
Yes. It's called, I have the tentative title, and I haven't secured a publisher yet. I'm feeling as a senior scholar, I'm going to write it and then shop it a little, thinking about the things I want. I want footnotes, I want a cover, I want, my tentative title for the book is A Feminist Politics of Resurrection, Early Christian Resurrection, with the subtitle Justice, Authority, and Flesh. And even though I've always operated with a feminist lens, I realize I've never put feminist in a book title before. And so I'm hoping maybe but then I don't know, I am open to the idea that, it won't sell so many books if you use the name feminist,
right.
Put feminist in the
Definitely
title.
An issue.
And so, I guess my overall goal is to sell the book, and it will be A Feminist Politics of Resurrection. It will, I will negotiate the title with the publisher.
But
the three modifiers are justice, authority, and flesh.
Yeah.
And it's revolving around. Let me talk about justice, resurrection, and justice, which I would say most biblical scholars know that earliest Jewish articulations of resurrection, belief were premised on the question of justice. It was because, why did these early Jewish texts start proclaiming resurrection? It's because people, the Maccabees who had, deserved reward from God were martyred instead, right? So the resurrection articulation is, God's ultimately going to provide justice to the suffering righteous.
That's right.
So that, and a lot of most biblical scholars nod, yeah. But what has always bugged me is that it is, if you just went on the street with a microphone, what is resurrection about? There's a lot of things that people say, but the word justice is not used. And if it's to my frustration, in Christian hymnals that I look through, and I look through various Christian hymnals, there is no Easter hymn that couches resurrection in terms of justice. It's about forgiveness. It's Jesus' forgiveness and atonement. But this thing that on the one hand is so obvious, and maybe people say, yeah, it really isn't known. And so I want to, to get us away from atonement theology and arguing about whether we get to live forever, which, the hope of eternal life, back to the sense of what does it mean that the earliest resurrection proclamation was about justice for the suffering righteous. And my first chapter takes that question up, looking at the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 27, I think, might be 28.
Okay.
It's my favorite passage, and I am a scholar who tends to find a verse that intrigues me or puzzles me, or which I say this is really weird, and then that becomes my article or my book chapter. But it's the passage where in Matthew, it's only in Matthew, where when Jesus dies, there's an earthquake, and then these saints who had fallen asleep are restracted. It's like, what's going on?
Yeah, little zombie scene, right?
Yeah, it is. But I have solved the puzzle. I know what this is about. And this is, it's, gotta read the first chapter, but it is Matthew is reaching into this early Jewish understanding that uses the book of Ezekiel, and that's, there are allusions in this passage to the rising of the bones, right? The valley of the dry bones. But there is a Jewish tradition of invoking the Ezekiel image of mass slaughter and God vindicating those who are mass slaughtered as part of resurrection. So that's chapter 1.
Gotcha. But I like that. That's a good nugget to sit with for a moment. And, it's interesting, Shelly. I just want to throw this out there that I have tended to think of the other side of, not necessarily resurrection, but the belief that justice needs to be served, and those who have inflicted this harm need punishment. And I've thought of that side in terms of some form of punishment or a place of punishment or a space for something. And to be honest, I haven't thought much about the justice for the suffering sake. I just haven't. And
makes sense. As particularly as as influenced by Western Christianity, the judgment of hell and the punishment is a very strong motif. Yeah. But that's another thing I write about in there, and drawing on other scholars who I've learned from. But there are in early Judaism a couple different ways that resurrection is articulated, and one of them resurrection is articulated as the precursor to judgment, and then you get sword and the sheep and the goats. But in other passages, and I would say this is true of the Ezekielian strand, the Ezekiel dry bones, that resurrection is salvation. That is, there's not, either, what happens to the bad people is just either not raised, or that's a different question, but that the stories of resurrection are about salvation, and so that don't focus on the judgment action.
That is really interesting. Yeah.
Again, it's certainly as Christianity unfolds, it is a minor theme.
It is, and it ought to have been focused, right? I mean, wouldn't that have been lovely if that had been the focus?
Resurrection and salvation.
But Paul, Paul messed that up.
Thinking, can we blame this all on Paul?
Oh, we can. Well, I do, Shelly. I do.
Yeah, well, blame it all on Paul. As I told my New Testament class this week, I can heap plenty of criticism upon that apostle, but when everyone else in the room is criticizing him, I can also come to his defense.
That's fair and is appropriate. I think it's important to voice the concern about people not being aware of all the like you were saying earlier, right? People don't want to hear you always criticizing, but I think there's something about Paul and how he is handled. I don't need to tell you this, that needs to be called out. But anyway, this isn't about Paul.
Yeah, I do think he plays with both kinds of images of resurrection. And that is another conversation I have with my colleague, Jeremy Williams. We agree that the liberating pieces of the text tend to come in fragments, like pieces or strands. But then when you get to these larger narratives, right, sort of imperial forces kind of shape the narrative. So I can find strands in the Pauline epistles where he's kind of hinting at this, I think, more healthy understanding of resurrection. But you're right. He's certainly 1 Corinthians 15 ends with that, the Jesus judging, tramping all the rulers under his feet. And then, so you've got a violent apocalyptic ending there. Okay, well, that's only chapter 1, but I'll spare you the rest.
No, I'd love to know. I mean, you said it's authority,
justice, authority,
flesh.
Oh yeah, let me say.
So, can we unpack those two?
We'll talk a bit about authority with this chapter. One of these forever chapters. It was. Every other chapter of the book revolves around an exegetical issue in which I am quite proud of what I would say is my innovative and persuasive exegesis. But I have in the center, chapter 3, a chapter on authority, which is about the authority of the ancient women at the tomb, and then also the authority of contemporary women who've written on women at the empty tomb. And that's more a literature review than my own exegetical insight. I just think that a lot, feminist scholars came into the field in any numbers beginning in the 1980s, but a lot of them wrote about resurrection because Mary Magdalene and the women at the empty tomb were just things of interest. But my thesis is that in the same way that the women's witness to the resurrection in the ancient texts gets put off center, and the brothers and Paul and Peter get that over. Happens with the women's scholarship as well. But then that also brings me into a question about most of this scholarship is by white women, and I have this section which I'm really happy about now, that womanist scholarship, the womanist scholarship or African American women's biblical scholarship, though it has burgeoned in the last 20 years, or 20, depending on how you count. I mean, there's just so much of it is, it's being published even as we speak.
Literally, yes.
But in the period that I'm looking at, womanists have not much written on Mary Magdalene. And so part of this chapter is an exploration, not just in terms of gender and authority, but also race and authority, and the problem of whiteness, which, like Kyriarchy, also is this, flag on our discipline.
So, flag on our discipline, yes.
But I'm happy. I finally, I didn't feel that I had anything original to say about Mary Magdalene and the women at the empty tomb, but I realized if I was going to write a feminist politics of resurrection, I couldn't ignore all of that scholarship. So I decided I like the way I've handled that in terms of the retrospective, thinking about citation, justice and citation. And so anyway, those are 2 teasers. I'm hoping to finish it this year. It will be done.
Oh, this
academic year.
Not calendar. Yeah.
I mean, it would be great December. I'm going to be close in December, but I need to be realistic, given that not on sabbatical right now.
Right. So you're not going to give us anything on the flesh piece?
Oh, the flesh. Yeah. Well, again, that, of course, that's probably the most complicated. But let me say it standing on one foot. Right. So as Christianity develops, Orthodox Christianity puts more and more emphasis on the fleshliness of the resurrection. Right. And the question, this is a puzzle, because as the church develops, it also becomes more patriarchal or kyriarchal, right? As hierarchy solidifies, right, in church development. But flesh is typically associated, if you're doing the binaries of flesh and spirit, right? Women with flesh, men with spirit, women with emotion, men with rationality. So how did it come to be that early Christians valued fleshly resurrection when that seems in some ways to be valuing femininity? Right?
I like the question. Yep.
Yeah. And my answer is that, I mean, it's kind of depressing, but
it's hypocritical. Is that what you're going to say?
Well, I mean, it is a gender-based reason. I do think the Orthodox, and people have said this about the Gnostic texts and other texts in general, but I want to say it about Luke and actually about Ephesians. There's a passage in the household code in Ephesians where it talks about we're of his, after the women are to submit because we're of the body and bones of Jesus, which is this weird thing. But what I want to argue about flesh and its privileging is that the reason the Orthodox fathers in all their kyriarchy wanted to insist in fleshly resurrection, at least for the time being, is that flesh is the matter into which gender is inscribed. And if resurrection is not fleshly, then women are not subordinate to men. Is that too roundabout? So you need flesh.
Seriously? Like how?
Yeah. So you need.
Yeah, you have to have flesh. You have to have humanness in order to have
subjection, of gender subjection, and it's kind of backwards. And I didn't highlight it in Ephesians, in that verse. And you've worked on Ephesians. Have you ever looked at the textual variant? In the wives to be submissive. Well, yeah, because it's regarded as, it just comes in the little footnote. If you have an NRSV, wait a second, why of his flesh. Okay, it's the justification, husband, wives be subject, husbands love your wives. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. For no one hates his own body, but he nourishes it just as Christ does, because we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones.
Oh.
That's the variant.
I see the variant there. Yeah.
And I argue that makes perfect sense. It's connected with what Luke's doing with saying, Jesus has flesh and bones. But I have convincingly shown, I will say, that it makes perfect sense to emphasize the fleshly resurrection of Christ when you want to emphasize submission, because
which is what's happening here. Yeah.
Because if women, if we're no longer in the flesh, but we're of the spirit, then you can't tell, you can't see the parts, you can't tell the men and the women. Right. So how would you know how to subject them?
Well, how strong? I mean, those are pretty strong variants, aren't they?
It is I can.
Sorry, I was looking at my
exactly. The reason that people have, these textual criticism committees have gone to the shorter reason is they don't know how to make sense of what it means to say we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones.
So now you can offer them a reason for why that could be included.
I would argue that, I'm not going to, fall on my sword that it's the original reading, but I am going to say it makes sense as a reading. I'm going to clarify the reading.
Why it is possible.
So the flesh chapter is taking up that question of flesh and its tie to subordination.
Wow. Thank you.
and why flesh is emphasized. And I would say Jesus's resurrection is emphasized as fleshy in Luke, but I don't think he ascends into the heaven in a fleshly body. I don't think Jesus is flesh in the heavens, as some people have said, because he's flesh. I just think he needs to be flesh on earth in Luke to let everybody else know that we are all still in the flesh. And so women, put those veils on and submit to your husband.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm dying. Some of this has been written in article form, but I've just got to tie it together, and I hope to do that by May at the very latest, possibly earlier, and get it off to publisher. So that's where I am. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I love the snippets. I know that there's a lot that goes into how you came about, in particular this piece. I'm just kind of mulling over the flesh. And sorry, I saw someone hanging out in the chat that I was distracted by there for a second.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, I think I'm done with my spiel, so I can take a question or two or close out if you're all tired.
Yes, no, I didn't mean to flake on you there. I do want to say, this is a good time, folks. If you're paying attention to what we're saying, this is a good time. If you did have questions for Shelly, for Dr. Matthews, to make sure that we can see those here in the next few seconds. And Shelly, there's a little bit of a lag, so it takes about 9 seconds or so before they actually, can post them. Anyway, so we'll keep chatting, but yeah, I'm kind of pulling things together here from our conversation and mulling over. It's fun to hear. Yeah, it's fun to hear more of your story and why you've done the work you've done. I appreciate it. I do hope that those who are watching, who are here live or watching later, can have a sense of appreciating that raising critical voices, engaging these texts is important, and it's difficult. It's delicate work to do. Just because there have been some strong, really impressive minds engaging a feminist lens for 40 years doesn't mean that the whole field understands what feminist criticisms are bringing, right? And so I don't know. It's just it's really interesting, I guess, given the people that do watch or follow the work that I do, trying to contextualize it for people who aren't in the field. They just know that they're passages that they're reading, and they can see that that's just bunk, like you did at 12, right? Like telling women to be submissive is dumb, and I don't like it. And so for a lot of people who are here chatting or whatever, like they're like, yeah, I don't need that in my life. I don't need X, Y, and Z. I actually like myself. I want to have a loving relationship or whatever. And these texts have been harmful, and I don't need to make any of it okay. And so I guess I'm trying to talk a little bit about why it's difficult. You and I just have these snippets of, conversations that we've had about, the gatekeepers in our field, and why, it's, you have important things to say that it's very difficult to even let them be heard or respected or seen, because, in the segment of, the field, they don't want to hear the challenges. And yet the conversation about the fact, like you were saying, let's have a more mature faith or relationship to the texts, that all requires like changing our thinking and growing up in terms of how we think about not just growing up, but changing the way we think about what the whole thing is. And that's big. It's big to challenge.
Right. And you need a community of people, especially if you grew up in a certain sort of, where the Bible made you scared. Yeah. You need community. It's hard to do that all on your own.
That's right. And so it feels like you're taking away the whole foundation when you challenge something like the Book of Acts as not actually helpful in many ways. In many ways, it is very harmful and isn't necessarily historical. Doesn't mean we have to throw the whole thing out. But that kind of delicate balance is hard for people in the pews, the general audience, as well as even some scholars, right? Right. How many biblical scholars still act as if Acts is kind of historical,
Right. Well, and then the demographics of people who do biblical scholarship. I was just reading Wongi Park's JBL article from a year or two ago, where he gives the demographics of the membership of the Society of Biblical Literature, and it's 75 point something percent male and maybe 83% white. So, and in that white male contingent, you have a lot of clerics of, from conservative or, more authoritarian denominations. And yeah, I mean, that's a wide swath of the discipline that is just doing a certain kind of biblical scholarship. And yeah, I mean, the voices of, I know you've had queer biblical scholars and, other critics of white male hegemony or dominance on the program, but we are a small slice. And probably even smaller. That's another thing I was going to say, is that I feel very lucky to have gotten into graduate school the way that I did, to become a biblical scholar. But the possibility to earn a PhD in biblical scholarship and then get a job in biblical scholarship, it's real hard. And the big places are only hiring one or two, or accepting one or two into the program. And I certainly know that I would never, if my qualifications from back in the day were,
on the table today,
submitted again to a PhD application committee, there's no way they would have taken this first generation college student, right, with a BA from the University of North Dakota. So anyway, so I don't know where the field's going to be in 20, 30 years, whether the feminist and minoritized voices are going to be in shaping the field.
Right. That's an interesting question, actually, what the field in general will look like or be.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I guess I'll probably still be engaging it. I don't know if you'll still be at that point in your life, but
well, that's great. You have great equipment. I've been fretting this whole time about how pale my screen looks and fuzzy and everything, but you look great, and I have appreciated having this conversation.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
I didn't see any specific questions come up for you. I think I tried to let you know that ahead of time. That a lot of times they're just here to chat, and then they're enjoying. And there've been a couple comments about really appreciating this. It was a great conversation and appreciated it. So just so you know,
nobody said mean things. That's good, or at least they were felt good.
There's some people coming in to say things that really aren't related. Oh, there is one question. Let's see. Oh, so maybe is it okay? One quick question. I know that you kind of. Okay. No, you're wrapping up. Okay, you're kind of hitting a wall or whatever. There was one question that might be of interest. So Holly Hawk has said, question: if the flesh and bones passage helped solidify subjugation over women, was that pushing back against something?
Good. You're reading against the grain, Holly Hawk. Yes. And I would say, it's not. I don't mean to be overly simplistic, but I do think in some people who were part of this Jesus movement were practicing. Galatians 3:28 says, among other things, there is no male or female in Christ, and I do think that some early Christians understood their baptism into Christ as a way to say that gender differences didn't matter anymore, because they were baptized, they were living life in the Spirit, if you will. Yeah, so exactly. I think the flesh and bones passage is pushing back against the idea that, as a matter of fact, we are in the age of the Spirit, where gender is no longer consequential. And that's why the author of this passage in Luke, which could be late, by the way, it's the very end of Luke. It's a very odd passage. It's a very odd description of the resurrection, but it makes sense as a way to say, oh, no, don't you think that we're out of the realm of flesh and bones? Because even the resurrected Jesus had flesh and bones, and that affirms that we are all embodied in flesh and bones, and some of us should be subjugated because our flesh has the signals of that. That's a great question, though. Thank you.
Yes, it is. Thank you for that. All right, I'm going to let you go, Shelly. Do you mind hanging out for just a second?
Sure.
We're going to
Thank
wrap
you,
up
guys.
here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll hold on to check the signals.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. I'll be back next week, actually, to share a little bit of my short course on Paul. I'm very excited to show that off to you all. And we're going to go out on my new, I think this is the new closing. So thanks for being here. Thanks for the moderators being here. Thank you for your interest, and I'll see you next week.